Well, good morning. Let's start the following session. This is again a keynote speaker session. We have the pleasure to have with us Professor Mette Berghauser. It's really great to have you here with us. Thank you a lot for your time with us and your presentation. Mette is Professor of Urban Morphology and Urban Design at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, which I have the pleasure to know, and I really recommend you to visit it, and also the city, of course. She leads the research area on Spatial Morphology Group, which is engaged in research in the areas of urban morphology, space syntax, and design theory. Through primarily analytical and quantitative methods, properties of built form and describe and its significance for peoples and other species. Use and experience of the city is investigated. Mette has published the book Space Matrix, Space Density and Urban Form in 2023, where the concept of density is critically examined. The book specifies the relationship between density and urban form, as well as the environmental, economic, and social effects of density. In addition to research, Mette teaches urban design. She's also the head of program of architecture with responsibility for the educational development of architectural education at bachelor's and master's level. So it is really nice to have you here. I'm sure your presentation will be quite insightful and interesting for the work of this symposium, and I hope you enjoy. Mette, thank you. The room is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Very nice. I actually have to make a small correction here because I'm not head of program of architecture anymore. I left that position the 1st of October, so very recently, which is actually good for my health because this was a bit too much. But it's a great pleasure to be here. I've actually enjoyed a lot to see all the presentations that are more on the building level, where I do not work so much with, but I'm very interested in. I'm originally educated as an architect, and then did my PhD in urban design and planning in Delft, University of Technology. And since 2010, I'm in Sweden. I was at KTH a bit, and then I went to Chalmers, which indeed is a great place to be, actually. And it's a huge pleasure to have to be able to lead the spatial morphology group. I have a picture of all the members because what I will present is actually not only my work, it's also the work of a lot of other people in the group. So it's important to say that. Okay, let's get started. What I want to do today is to actually talk about the importance of how we represent the built environment, which is at the core of what we have been discussing a lot, but also to link that directly to kind of a plea for putting evidence-based design more on the foreground to be able to address all the challenges that we are facing. And we heard a few of those already today. And I thought I will start with a few of these quotes, because in architecture, and we have seen a bit of that also the last days, there's one artistic approach, let's say, this more within architecture, which is extremely important. And we saw these generative sort of forms occurring that in iterative processes that you can do with computational means, but you can also, let's say, what we did traditionally. We just sort of put it on the back of an, let's say we go to the cafe and we draw something and we don't really know what's happening, but we create beautiful things. But it's not only about beautiful things, they also have to perform in certain ways. And I think that's the fantastic thing about architecture and urban planning, that you have to do both. We have to be both technical and artistic at the same time. And all these quotes kind of are talking about this. And I think an evidence-based approach is a way to actually handle that we assess what we are creating all the time to actually make sure that the world becomes a bit of a better place to live in. And I will not talk about these huge challenges. I mean, you know, but I still have one, let's say I have this slide to just start off with. And I work, kind of everything I do has to do with these two. There is an urbanization trend. So cities are part of the problem, but also part of should be part of the solution, because people are moving into cities, they densify or not, and that has impacts on how we live our lives, how we move around. Do we use public transport or not? Are there possibilities for that? But it also affects ecosystem services, biodiversity as such. So urbanization is something that we just have to handle. It's on the table that we have to deal with. Then we have the planetary boundaries, and there are many of them. Climate change we have talked about a lot today. It has both, we have to sort of mitigate it, so reduce by the way we design our cities, but also have to adapt to the impacts it already has, like the hazards that we discussed this morning. But also biodiversity loss is actually part of our responsibility, because if we urbanize, the way we do actually impacts the way nature can thrive and let's say the healthiness of nature. And you probably all know this donut of Raworth talking about the ecological ceiling. So, I mean, we have one planet we have to handle, that's what we have to work with. But we also have a social foundation. So all our solutions have to sort of kind of cope with both of them. People have to thrive, should improve their health, and all other species' health, but it also has this ecological ceiling. So everything I do, I try sort of to sort of bring this, put that in that perspective. And when I started working on my PhD for many years back, and the book that you mentioned, the 2023, is actually kind of a continuation of the book that already published in 2010, but we just added things on and made revised versions, etc. So the latest version is an open access book with the latest findings, how we represent the built environment in the model. We talk a little bit about evidence tools. I will not come back to so much. So back to density and how, as I said, 65% of the papers that I read about the impact of densification, they use a very, very crude way of measuring density. And even if we would use floor area ratio or floor space index, these three examples have the same. So even that is for an architect not very sort of satisfying, because we can agree that these are very different urban forms, very different types of buildings, and most probably very different performances in all kinds of things. Daylight, how much space do you have to do other things in the let's say your open space related to your house. Also, the street network is very different. So everything is different, kind of, but they have the same floor area ratio. So what I did in my PhD is to develop a way sort of to grasp this better. We thought this cannot be the answer. We leaned a lot on the work of Martin and March from the 1970s. Who already started to sort of look into the logic of different types of buildings and variations in both floor space index, but also coverage, ground coverage, etc. So what we did is actually look into, okay, what ways of measuring density are out there? And open space ratio is one of them, ground space index, floor space index, all were used. The only thing in a way what we did is to put them together in a mathematical diagram, sort of let them talk to each other because they're mathematically related. So you can actually put them in the same diagram. And then what we did is to look at a lot of examples, empirical examples. And here you see two examples that say actually the same thing as my first image. It's two very, very different urban environments that have the same floor space index. So they are in the same horizontal line in the diagram. They have like a floor space index of 2. Floor space index is the same as floor area ratio. I think you know what it is. It's like how much floor area do you have in relation to a plot of land. But you see also that the ground space index of these two is very, very different. So this one takes 13% of the land is built upon, while this one is almost 50%. And that means that they are positioned in different locations in the diagram. Also, the height is different. And that's the only reason, let's say, that they can have the same floor space index and so different ground floor coverages is because they have different heights. So these, as soon as I reduce the height of that one, it would sort of walk down along the diagram and become another typology. So this is a very elegant way to sort of capture typologies. And we did this cluster analysis and found actually clusters in this diagram, capturing through density metrics, also building types and building qualities. More informative for an architect. And here you see a few of those examples. When I did this, actually, it was a lot of just hand work. The data was very bad. So what we actually did was we got the plans, we measured it in AutoCAD to start with and calculated the floors ourselves because we tested to get the data from authorities, but it was so bad that we stopped. So we did everything actually manually. And I will show you how we now have taken a lot of steps to automate the whole process. But going back to this image, of course, we would like to see this space matrix model instead used to look into all the impacts of densification. And there are very, very few studies doing that. Another thing to sort of think about when we talk about density is it's not only about that having more variables captures the urban environment better, but we should also be very aware of the scale of the analysis. What land do we actually look at? And as I already showed you earlier, let's say if you use the population data, it's on the census tract. It's kind of a morphologically weird unit. It's let's say it's developed for completely different reasons. So what we did here is to sort of, okay, what are the morphological units we want to know the density of? Well, the plot, the block, the urban fabric, the districts. You probably recognize the way of that's the way a morphologist would talk about, let's say, relevant units. But the differences, you see the results, the floor space index, it changes, of course, because the higher scale we go, the more unbuilt land is added, so the density decreases. If we would go to the city, it would drop even further. This is logic. I mean, it's but the way we do this, so the choices you make here are very, very important, which you all probably know is known as the modifiable area unit problem. So this is an important thing. And actually we thought, so I did this, this was my PhD, but this was the way we did it. But it was a bit unsatisfying. So what we did later was to actually move away from this area-based definitions where you sort of say, this is the unit, and then I calculate my density, to go to an accessible approach, accessible density approach, where you actually have a floating border. So every building or every address has its own neighborhood. Walking 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you calculate all the buildings that you reach, and that becomes the accessible density of that building. That's neighborhood's building, let's speak. And every building has its own. So in that sense, it's floating borders. But it becomes very, it's not only interesting in terms of that it allows you to analyze whole cities, regions in a very easy way, but it also solves kind of the MAU problem because you can actually do this on different radii and see what's going on. It becomes easier to study that. It makes this not irrelevant because for practitioners, this is very relevant. Because if we prescribe density in zoning plans, we do it like that. We don't do it like that because it becomes hard to control, etc. But these are linked. It's the same data, and they are telling us different things. So it's important to always look at both. And I can exemplify. So here we have a high density plot, which is actually located in a low density neighborhood. While this plot is low dense, located in a high density neighborhood. And in terms of what we can expect in activities, let's say economic activities, flows of people moving around, most probably that one has higher economic activities than that one, although the plot density is higher here. So this is it's an important thing to sort of understand, let's say, how to describe the built environment and what it tells us, what it doesn't tell us. We use this approach to actually start mapping whole cities. And what you see there is Amsterdam, and it's a density map of Amsterdam, but it's not floor area ratio. It's actually floor area ratio, coverage, building height, and open space ratio at the same time, representing building types in Amsterdam, which is a very informative map. And we did that for many cities. And this approach has been kind of, these sort of developing typologies with this logic has been spreading. In my group, we did the plot types as well. We also worked with street types with Michael Serra, and Alice Vialar developed block types, a little bit parallel to what we have been doing. But this is kind of similar approaches. So you look at the morphological element that we know is important, and enrich the description of that so that the data represents also something that is really important from an architectural perspective. We did a similar thing for streets, and we have seen quite some space syntax studies in this symposium, and you, I think, all are familiar with that. But what we did here is actually, instead of looking at 20 maps that show angular betweenness on the 500 meters, 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, and then you have to sort of try to understand. They are all relevant and informative. But can we economize this into a typology that actually describes for each street its profile across the scales? You have some streets that have low centrality all the time, independent if it's a local analysis or a global analysis. We call that a background street. Then you have other streets, that's the C1. So you see this is the scale of analysis, but it's low all over throughout all the scales. Then you have another street, what we call the city street, which actually have a relative high value and increases when you go to higher scale. So it's the street that is important for the movement patterns in all scales. So you will meet a local person going to the bakery and someone crossing the whole city. Both people are in the same street segment, most probably. And that's what this city street is capturing. And then you can start mapping cities with that. And we don't need, let's say, 20 maps, but one map is enough to describe that. And you see kind of a superstructure emerging of the city street, kind of a super grid of the mega block, or how we want to call it. And I thought I will give you a little bit of detail, because we have now also, after that we developed this, we have now made a script that sort of captures the whole process. So going from extracting the street network from OSM, transform the graph, filtering, cleaning, then we go to the PST tool that I talked about earlier, to segment, do the analysis on all scales, and then you do a few statistical analysis, and then the output, as I just showed. And this is, let's say, kind of almost, who talked about the click on the, let's say, it's just one button and then the whole thing runs. Not completely, but almost. So what I show you a few of those. So in the PST tool, what it first does is it runs the analysis on many, many scales. So from the very local scale to the global scale. And so this is this enormous amount of maps that you have to put on the wall, and then you have to sort of synthesize and try to understand what's going on. After that, we do a PCA analysis, so principal component analysis, to instead of having these 20 maps, we have actually 3 that explain the variation in those 20 maps. So that's already a kind of a reduction and grasping easier what's going on. But from that, we even do a cluster analysis, and then we arrive at the one that I showed you earlier. And here you see a set of other cities that we recently did. And a zoom in. And the interesting thing is that it captures the main structure. It shows the background streets you don't even see here. They are so light. I think they disappear almost. But it's a very, very powerful way to sort of see immediately the structure. So this is a lot of work we do, sort of developing these descriptions of the built environment, enriching them without making them, I mean, they're complex, but they're complex in the sense of the information they embed, but actually when you look at them, they're quite easy to grasp. Besides this, we want to develop this evidence. Yeah, okay, then we have all these nice maps, but what do they tell us? And of course, you know this, the theory of natural movement, where centrality, so the analysis that I just showed you, the street types, is an important one, informing about the potential for pedestrian movement and co-present in those street segments. But in the theory of natural movement that Hilja developed, it's also the attraction are there and density. So what we did a few years back is to actually thought, let's do a large-scale survey to see whether this indeed holds in different cities, different neighborhoods, from very low dense to very high dense. Let's see what happens. So we went to London, Amsterdam, and Stockholm, and put out sensors in those cities, in 53 neighborhoods, in 3 cities, in total almost 700 streets. Boxes like these were put on the, let's say, street corners, and we could actually follow people moving through our neighborhoods. And so it was kind of, you see here, you see all the neighborhoods spread out over the cities. And on the yellow points, we had these boxes that counted, okay, how many people passed, and we could also follow the same person walking through the neighborhood, so which route it took. And what it showed is that, so when we did all the correlations, 65% could be explained by only 2 variables, and that is the street type and the density type. And then we have done a lot of alternatives and also looking at the separate variables. But that is kind of it's kind of 2 variables in a way that are rich in themselves, explain 65% of the pedestrian flows in all these neighborhoods. And it was the build density that explained the number of people, and centrality, the distribution of them. So in each neighborhood, whether it was a villa area or a very dense inner city area, we found kind of a high street, the main street with the most people. Of course, there were less in the low dense areas than in the high dense areas, but we saw these variations. And you see that sort of represented in those graphs, representing the density types and the street types. And the higher the bar, the more people we counted in the streets. We took recently a next step, because this is all describing how the built environment influences the probability of people being there at the same time. So saying something about the intensity of flows, etc. But what we thought is, can we also predict in a new city where we don't have observations? So we used a model that was trained in Stockholm and predicted the flows in Gothenburg. And when we had a set of validation data to see how well we did. Was not so, I mean, this is another, it went quite well. But the exact numbers are hard to detect, and especially those that have very, very high numbers. And we actually know that from earlier studies that it's hard to predict those. But if you look, so it was kind of a correlation of 0.52 that we got for this prediction. But what the interesting thing is, so this is the observed counts, and these were the predicted counts. And what you see is that the streets, the segments with the highest flows are also the highest flows in the predictive model, but the exact numbers are not correct. So that's the reason the correlation is not that high, but actually the distribution, where do we find most people and fewest people, that's very good. From an urban planning perspective, that's actually probably good enough. But here a lot of work still is needed to go further. And we also went to combining different ways of modeling. So what we do is actually statistical models to find out the numbers of people in different street segments. But then we link that to an agent-based model, actually as an input data, to know how many agents do we let loose in in the outsides of their the agent-based model. So how many people should start walking here and there? And that came from the statistical model as an input. And then they did the agent-based, you give them some rules of how they behave. And that was on the right, you see the observations, so the real movement patterns on a location in Gothenburg. And this is work on the right. The agent-based model is not the work from my team, so we actually collaborated with another team in Gothenburg to do this. But this is the way, let's say, to get our ways of modeling the built environment also validated with observations, and what does it tell us actually in the end. And most recently, we have been moving to, we're doing this and stuff, density, centrality, movement patterns, economic activities. We have been doing that for many years. We keep on doing that. But we decided to also broaden, let's say, our understanding, and especially looking into the conflicting impacts of urbanization and densification. And then I go back to this image that I showed you earlier. Because we have very little understanding actually about the ecological impacts, some health impacts that very often, if you read all these papers with the negative impacts of densification on these aspects, some are very explicit about it. Sometimes it's a bit more implicit, but it's very often about the availability, accessibility of green areas, because they reduce when you densify. And that has an impact on ecologies, of course, a negative impact, but also on health. So what we decided is let's add the layer of the green and blue infrastructure. So that's what our recent work and current work is very much about that. So to summarize, so this is kind of our research agenda, so to speak, for the coming years. So this we have done a lot. Urban form, the built environment in relation to social processes and economic processes. We have done a lot of work here, and many others, and we know a lot. There has been a lot of studies. We have a few people in our team also to look into the ecological processes like flooding, urban heat islands, and how urban form affects that. But there is not so much work about the interaction between those two. So that's where we want to head for. And it has to do with that why are green areas healthy for people? Or let's say why it has to do, so then you have to go into that interaction. Now what we want to look into is how, by the organization of the built environment, we influence the frequency of interaction. So how often do you actually do you interact with nature? And then nature can be for recreational purposes, but it can also be biodiversity, et cetera, but also to look actively into because there are negative and positive interactions. Of course, we want to reduce the negative ones and improve and sort of optimize or increase the positive ones. And also we want to avoid severe negative interactions. So it's not about, oh, let's get the green inside of cities and everything is fine. You have to sort of design that very consciously. So what we do there is to, so this is, I already showed to you. You have kind of a theoretical model how these interactions take place. What are the important variables? On the top, you have the urban form variables that we have been developing. And here is the phenomena we want to understand. To understand the green, there is a similar kind of model. It has to do with habitat quality and urban ecology and landscape ecology. They have developed a lot of, let's say, knowledge. So we don't have to do that. It's out there. And habitat connectivity play an important role for species mortality, mobility, and diversity. So it's not so that we are going there. We want to be in this arrow in between. And so you can build up this conceptual model further. So to make this a bit more sort of understand what we are talking about. For instance, habitat connectivity in cities is very much affected by accessibility, the street network. Those create barriers for the habitat connectivity. Also density does. So there are these links between those two that we want to understand and use. And I give you just a few examples. This is really, let's say, we are in the middle of doing all this, both theoretically and developing the models and doing the observations. But one example is was a PhD thesis that was finished 2 years ago. And she looked into trees, urban trees. And here is a very, I mean, trees have a lot of ecosystem services that they provide. And of course, to provide those, they have to also to be in proximity to people. So where do you position your trees to be most effective actually to providing those services? So what she did, she looked into all the, I don't have to go into detail, but one example that where she tested this is to look into the visual exposure to tree canopy. So where are they? Where do we see them? But also you can add a lot of other services that they provide, shading. I mean, there can be many things that you could add here. Look into pedestrian densities based on the space syntax analysis. And you can overlay those to actually develop a tree planting priority plan. So where should we plant trees so that they have most impact on people passing by? So that is one way sort of to combine this, as a kind of a low-hanging fruit, because this is relatively easy. And another thing that we recently published with an ecologist in the group is to actually use this model about habitat quality and habitat connectivity that we know affects species mortality. But what he did is to actually use our models for attraction density and accessible centrality in his models and improved the predictive power to very high, to large extent. So that is, let's say, so here we just use our models and put it in his model that is quite common in understanding mortality, mobility, and diversity of species. And he uses a model like this, where then actually one of the frictions becomes density and centrality. And based on those frictions, and you have the quality of the green areas, those combined give you a dispersal map of these species. And etc. So this is a kind of, we just implement our models in a model that is used in ecology. What we are doing now is to look into our building types, centrality types, and the green areas and their connectivity, and look into does this combination, this built environment setup, let's say, of all these variables, does it impact biodiversity? And then we look at birds. And what we actually want to show with that, so the hypothesis is that you can create high dense areas with green, with a good connectivity that has a higher biodiversity than low dense areas, to get rid of this idea that high dense is bad for biodiversity. So what we did is to have, so all the dots here are parks, green areas of all kinds, very small. Sometimes it's only a row of trees. Sometimes it's a small pocket park. Sometimes it's a bit bigger. The biggest ones are the bosses here. We call that reference observations. And we spread the parks, let's say, across different types of density. And we only look at the higher density types. So you see them here. This is the inner city of Gothenburg. And we have, so we had 30 sensors last spring in those areas. And what they do is they look like this. They're very small. We just put them, we actually have bought a bit better boxes than just a plastic bag, but that doesn't matter. And it counted for 3 months. It sort of collected acoustics. And then we used machine learning to identify which species are there. We only looked at birds for the moment. And we are not interested in a specific species of birds. We just want to know the richness of how many different do we find here. And birds are very, let's say, a good thing. I mean, they are good indicators of biodiversity, but people are very attached to birds. When we hear birds, it does something with us. I think we have never had so much attention for a research project that we did. So they're calling us from the radio and asking it, because it's birds, I think, that we are looking into. When we counted people, they were not interested at all. But when we count birds, they are very, very interested. So this, I don't have the results yet. So we did a pilot. So what we get is that we know, so these birds, they were there. You see how many There are actually how many sounds we collected. It's not, it can be the same bird that we don't know. And so you get that, a profile, and we get this profile per site. And we also get a profile of richness per site and also over time. And now I didn't bring that picture, but what we already have seen is that actually the big parks in Gothenburg have not the highest richness. It's very often the parks that are much smaller, in a certain way positioned in the urban fabric, that have a very high richness. So it's absolutely, we already have seen, let's say very roughly looking at the data, that it's a much more complex picture than that. Indeed, higher density have lower diversity, or bigger parks have a higher diversity. It's not like that. It's much more intricate, and we hope to find, let's say, the variables that really trigger how we could combine high density with greenery, that sort of where biodiversity thrives, besides that people thrive. So that's where we are exactly now. Going back to this sort of overview of, we need to have the right models, representations, we need to collect evidence, and that means doing observations, really sort of get out there and know how do our models affect these types of phenomena. And then we need to develop the tools. And I just summarized, let's say, a few challenges. I mean, there is a research agenda for us, what we need to do, but there is actually also has implications for education, because to work in an evidence-based approach, you need to know as a designer what evidence is. You need to know a bit more how you should read those papers that present this evidence. So it requires new skills, maybe. It also requires skills to use spatial analysis to make the evidence site specific, because it's not just reading that this large park is good for that. I mean, it's always a lot of variables that come together. So you need to do analysis to see if your scenario, your proposal is performing well. For practice, there are also things to look into. I think standardization, for instance, of the types of analysis they should do is one of those steps. We cannot sort of let them find out themselves. We have to help out there. But for research, if we look there, I think, so this one, the metrics, the descriptions of the built environment is key. I mean, that is really, I mean, it's really on, I think, on the table of urban morphologists to sort of to develop those. And then take a step to what does that mean for data, and talk to authorities and say that you should start collecting this and this and this data for this and this purpose. We need to do larger sample size studies. We need to do longitudinal studies. We need to do post-occupancy studies to really sort of get better in this high level evidence. And I think we should also start working much more with systematic reviews, meta-analysis, to collect, let's say, not only one study that says something, but 20 studies that say the same thing, and then we can put it out in practice. I think this is really it's kind of a collective research agenda that I see as very important if we want to go, which I think we should, in a more evidence-based and research-informed design practice. Not meaning that the artistic approach is not important. It's both, like I said in the beginning. And here's my team working on this, and a lot of papers that I've had in my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Meta, for this wonderful presentation. I have a few questions, but before, I would like to know if someone, yes, Anna, can you have a mic for Anna, please? Anna is at the bottom of the room.
Thank you. It's working. It's working. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really inspiring to see the efforts the entire team can go through to reach so many people and to reach planning practice, which is one of my primary focuses in research right now. And because of that, I also wanted to ask, in my research, I've been finding that this seemingly apparent relationship between the tools that we make, the rationale behind those tools, the impact that those tools shows that urban form has on socioeconomic dynamics, when we're trying to transmit this to planning practice, sometimes this gets lost as one element that seems to not reach. And this contact sometimes most times isn't easy. And I was wondering if in your experience you have maybe some pointers, not the exact word, but some pointers into how we can standardize, as you were saying in this final slide, this approach from quantitative to rational to socioeconomic impacts to approach practice more easily.
Yeah, very good question. And this is very hard. I know we have been, let's say, struggling. I think we are sort of getting at the point. So we have been working with in Sweden since I moved to Sweden a lot with this. And that's now 14 years. And actually only now we are at the point that we together with them, so a few of the forerunner municipalities are developing standards. It's doing it together with them. I think that's the key. But it took us this long to actually get that point that we sort of go together and spend time and money to do this. And I've done something similar actually already in the Netherlands. So when I did the density, so my PhD actually became a standard for calculus for measuring a density. So there is a standard, which is actually a European standard because no one else had it. So if the Dutch sort of publish it, then it becomes immediately a European standard. It hasn't been flying, let's say that everybody is using it, but in the Netherlands, they use it. So they have the whole country kind of a space matrix approach, using all the variables and all the different scale levels. They have that, and the data is gathered in that manner, etc. So there are, let's say, examples where you, in both cases, it's kind of the step towards standardization that actually helps a lot. And in the Netherlands, it took me 3 years to get that standard in place. Also with stakeholders and the whole process of doing that.
Yes, Vinicius, and then Rudy.
Hello, I'm Vini Neto, Cita FEUP, and just like obviously first to congratulate you on this wonderful pieces of research you showed us, and I was particularly interested in your actually the last part of your presentation on this idea of going further in terms of integrating kind of thinking about relations between cities, social processes, and nature, other species. We can, I'm not sure, I mean, if this is completely obvious, the fact that even our concepts of sustainability are so anthropologically centered. It's so impressive to see that it's all about the future, our future generations, of which indeed it is, right? But we have to take into account the survival of other species which are disappearing by hundreds a year or so. So I really salute you for this research line you have there, and the idea of this, stimulating these interfaces and researching these interfaces between urban life, if you will, and the life of other species surrounding us and within and around cities. So the idea of exploring this interaction, the contact, we talk a lot about social diversity and the importance of intergroup contact in order to stimulate awareness of social differences and other groups and naturalize those differences. This has a positive impact for, obviously, most of our lives, if you will, but so little is spoken about the contact from in between species, right? So just a comment, and if you want to elaborate further on that, or I would love to hear it.
No, I mean, I think it's kind of I see it as key for future urban designers and planners to actually be able to handle this, and it's kind of natural, can come to our the way we have been thinking. We create places of high interaction between people. I mean, it's not that far reach to think about, okay, can we create places where you have high interaction between nature and people? We should also create places where actually in cities we create segregation between the two, because sometimes they have to be segregated, so separated from one another, and we can design that. I mean, we are very good at that. That's the whole design skills that we have, but we just add another perspective. I don't think it's very, and I noticed this for the students, it's very easy to grasp this. They run with it immediately. If you provide them with the knowledge, the tools to do it, it's very easy to integrate it in the design proposals. And you get, what is so fascinating, you get new typologies, new ways of looking at cities. So I think it's a very fascinating approach, both, let's say, in teaching and in research. It's very rewarding to work with this.
Rudis?
Yes, thank you for very interesting lecture, and a lot of information to process and to think about. So maybe my question will, is very specific. I'm just trying to, relate it to some of the work I've been doing. But I was wondering if you might be able to, if you have a opinion, or you might be able to give some feedback on the use of local climate zone classification, which is of course easily done based on satellite imagery, because there seems to be quite a similarity between with the building types.
Mm.
So yeah, that was my question.
No, yes, true. There's a lot of similarities actually, especially if you integrate it with the, let's say, I integrated the unbuilt space in, let's say, in the typologies, but actually not sort of putting information about what kind of open space is it green or not, and that you need for the climate zones. But if now we are adding the green layer and the blue layer, I mean, immediately you actually get there. So I think that I haven't thought about it, but because in a way the climate zone types, they work, let's say, and we published one paper with one of my postdoc researchers that looked into how effective they are, and he developed an automated method to actually do this indeed with imagery. So there's not really a need to develop another method for that. So what we very often, but what I think we could add is the multiscalarity, because they are very, I mean, you look at them as very area based, but we of course also know that it's very dependent on, are you part of a bigger system of greenery? So I think there we could really add something. And that is the same kind of knowledge that you need to talk about ecosystems that are thriving and healthy. You cannot look at individual islands or habitats. You have to look into the multiscalarity of it. I think very often we that's where we go. It's both in the density and the centrality and the greenery. It's like looking at the local and immediately include how it is embedded in a bigger system. So I think there we could probably contribute. I haven't thought about it, but I think that's the way where we could contribute a lot.
Tasos?
Yep. Hello. So thank you for the overview. I knew a couple of things, but I saw some new research that I will go and read more about. For the first part, which I think we talked a bit yesterday, but now I've seen the work that you do is really cool, and the way you expanded it. So I'm referring, let's say, to the slide where it's also Miguel Serras and others, where your kind of classification that is, you're using all these different ways of calculating the ratios of buildings, the heights, the open space versus build space for every neighborhood, plus your speciality, of course, the accessibility. What do you think? Well, biased here. What do you think about an extra, let's say, so we've got plots, you did the work with segments, Miguel. What about, let's say, a full topographical 3D pixel-based, like I did, okay, biased, plug there. What do you think about this being a standard way of representing the space across different scales, cities, and urban morphologies? Because of course you said it in the last slide as well that you're looking for this. And as well, that's why I studied it, because I thought it might be a bit more easy for me. So that's my question. What do you think about this being like an extra bubble, let's say, in all your little projects there? And of course, the last part with the birds is super cool. And I've got a question, or maybe a suggestion. I don't know if it's a question because it's still early, as you said, about sound and the way it propagates through different parks with different trees and things like that. So the distribution of microphones might have something to do with the recognition of birds, let's say. So the smaller plots of land can pick up more activity because the decay and the canopy is a bit different. So the decay of sound and the filtering that happens, where in the big one, or maybe there's something else, which if it's something else, it's even more exciting. But the sound and the birds, I think it's
probably
it's amazing for a city.
Yeah, so maybe for the last one, I think it might be, I haven't thought about, we did some testing, let's say how far the reach is of what it captures and not captures, and mainly to sort of position the sensors to that they not pick up the same sound, because then you sort of, but we didn't look into whether it has, so probably what we should do, like we also do with automated, let's say the sensors to count people, we always validated this by manual counts to sort of see if what does the machine count actually and what is the reality. So we might need to do the same for the sensors with the birds. But the other question that we have discussed a lot. So let's say, so what we have decided is that when we try to understand or describe the streets, we can add the multiscalarity. You could even add, which we didn't do, the width of the streets to describe, let's say, the unit or the element street, which is a morphological unit that, as a designer, I mean, what we're designing streets. We're not designing, let's say, that in combination with the buildings, and because it would actually reduce also the innovations of new combinations, new assemblages, as you mentioned. So yes, of course, that would be interesting to, I mean, from a descriptive point of view, it could be interesting to combine all these and do a cluster analysis and see how these come together. We have done that mostly in relation to, okay, what do we find in reality now, which combinations occur more often. So that we have done, but we didn't combine them in the typology because we think from a design perspective, if you want to intervene, it becomes hard to know where do we intervene in. Because what part, and also when you start relating that package, describing the whole built environment in one thing to certain phenomena, it's not hard to know which part of the built environment is actually influencing. So that's part of the reason that we kept it apart. So we did the plots separately, the buildings separately, the streets separately. Now the green we will do in the same way, separately. but the question about, let's say, the climate zones is actually there, they combined. So there might be reason to actually also do that, but that has been the background, let's say, why we have avoided that in a way very actively. I'm not, so it's very much from the design and intervention perspective to keep it apart.
Thank you for the inspiring presentation. I was thinking about, it's obviously that these methodologies, these quantitative methods, this open a lot of possibilities. And have you ever included communities like a participative process, kind of in a cybernetic way, trying to think a recursive process, informed design, but including the complexity of the people issues in the process? Have you ever think about that?
Not inhabitants, let's say, but we are very often out in let's say with practitioners, all different stakeholders, but not, let's say, but professionals, all of them. And then you get, let's say, another kind of knowledge sort of is put on the table, of course. So in that sense, yes, and that is it's very. I mean, these models tell you one part of reality and what is important, but there are other aspects that are not included, where this type of stakeholders come in and actually know, yeah, but I mean, this we can never change because of, and there are a lot of reasons why you cannot sort of change this street segment, which would, from our models, would maybe be the most logical thing to do. So that kind of things we have been doing and developing scenarios with them. I mean, then you get also all these other kinds of knowledge in. So then it becomes part, our models become part of one aspect of the decision-making process, in a sense. So in that sense, we have tested and tried to evaluate, okay, what is the role of these models in the decision-making process side by side with all other things. And another thing that not me, but let's say I've been involved in, is to actually have more the perception of different places. But that's more like an observation that you can relate to the models. So not so much co-creation or co-design with local communities in that sense. And of course, I mean, you could do that. It's just not really our specialty. So that's more, let's say, in.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I'm putting the hat of the architect. You started your presentation saying that you were trained as an architect. And I saw in my students that there's a growing interest on biodiversity. But as architects, we do most of us are very focused on the indoor environment. So how can, in this biased again, because I'm touching right now, I'm doing some research on view access and view quality, which could also have a strong relationship with the type of tools and the type of approach, particularly the last part that you presented. But how do you see, in your former self as an architect, how can this shape also the design of architecture and building technology, parameters for architecture, when we start zooming in to the building scale?
Yeah, maybe I should start with that. When I say architect, then an architect is a design of the built environment from the building to the city scale. But I'm trained at Delft, and there they have actually a master in building design and in urban design and planning. I did actually the master in building design. So in that sense, I'm, let's say, very long in the start of my career, I was more a building designer, and actually had a firm doing that as well, but that doesn't matter. But well, let's say buildings are part of the built environment, let's say the larger built environment as well. So if you want to create cities that create both places where people can meet, places where you can interact with nature in different ways, then I think buildings play actually a crucial role, because large part of and streets play a crucial role. So how do we create multifunctional streets that have both a social function and a transport function and an ecological function? The same goes for buildings. How can buildings become, let's say, part of that ecosystem of creating both a habitat for people to live in those buildings or work there, but they or have also roofs that can be used for other stuff. They can have, so they're all I think we should sort of see those artifacts having multiple purposes. And then the buildings are part of the whole story, both in flooding, recommendation. Buildings can play a role, let's say, gathering the water in a certain way. They can play a role with green roofs and green facades to be part of habitat, creating habitat connectivity throughout cities. I mean, I think there are many of those aspects, and not because you see these very cool buildings that are then green everywhere and they are in the middle of a desert of non-green areas. They will not do anything. They will not sort of contribute. I mean, they look nice. Maybe for people they can be actually thriving and nice to look at, but they will not contribute to biodiversity. But if you locate them well, they can. So that's kind of the kind of knowledge that I want to bring in then for architects to work with. So where do you position those green buildings to perform, let's say, in terms of biodiversity also?
Franklin?
Okay, it's amazing how the depth of research and well, where we get in the instruments of science to create new and beautiful cities. And well, I'm sure that those methods could create a city where every one of us would like to live. Nevertheless, the social problems of the city, you don't address them. I see nothing about it. I don't really know the Swedish society. I don't know if those are the problems that the Swedish society has, but well, here in Portugal and in France, in Spain and England, well, what we see is that people are not, a great share of people in the cities are not really interested in this, but in getting affordable housing.
Yes.
Yeah, so what the problem is not the disappearing of some species of bird or butterfly, but of the low classes from the certain places. And it's even less agreeable than this, because it's not only that is not the embellishment of the city is their problem. It's not their problem, but not only that, because I think in many cases they are against the embellishment of the city. Gentrification has been, well, some solution for making the cities better, but the low classes see the gentrification as something very bad. Embellishing the city signifies that they are going to be expelled from that kind of better city. So I know for a relationship that, for example, in London, some neighborhoods are organizing where the gentrification is accomplished. They are organizing the destruction of the embellishments. So they are not only alien to embellishment, but they are against embellishment. So I think you can help all of these people.
No, so I didn't talk about issues of segregation and gentrification, but actually there's been a lot of studies. I've done a few in our group. So when you look into, so segregation, I mean, it's a very complex topic, but you can sort of roughly divide it in two. So you have one part of segregation is about how, and the solutions that are discussed is to mix different groups in neighborhoods and offer different types of buildings, different, let's say, the social housing and ownership and all these issues, let's say, sort of to sort of have a mixture of different groups of society play in the same area. I've not worked with that so much. But the whole idea about behind space syntax is to understand co-presence and intensity of people. And co-presence is a way to actually also address segregation. So who is actually meeting in public space? And the way we organize our both, let's say, where we have the higher densities and lower densities, but also how these areas are connected to each other, influences a lot who you meet in public space. So we have done studies, to just give an example, of different squares in Gothenburg, because in Gothenburg we have a huge issue. In Sweden in general, there are, let's say, segregated areas where a lot of people with low incomes are living together, and then you have the gentrified areas, etc. What we showed was that depending on how a square in those neighborhoods is integrated with the rest of the city, affects who you will find on those squares. So what we did is we interviewed those people, where do you come from? So we know how many people there were, and we knew from which other areas they came to that square. And the areas that were spatially segregated were also socially very segregated, while there were also locations that had a very, low income group living in that neighborhood, but they were visited by a lot of people from other areas in the cities. And we know from, let's say, studies in sociology that meeting of different groups in society is extremely important for creating new norms and all that kind of issues. So in that sense, there's quite a lot of those studies. Our group is not specialized in that. There are other groups doing that. So I group that in the things that we know quite a lot already. Let's say the arrow that I said about centrality, density, and social economical issues. This is one of them. We know quite a lot. Not that we have solved it. I agree with you. We haven't solved it, because very often the interventions that are done in those areas are very local. And we very often say you should actually invest in connecting neighborhoods with one another. To create interaction in public space, instead of that we want to create interaction by forcing people to live in the same neighborhood, which is also a very difficult thing actually to, it takes a lot of effort and interventions to get there. So that was one of my answers. Now I forgot the other question you had. But there is a lot of work done, let's say, in that field. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. There was actually also a lot of studies that show that the health gap which we have in all societies has actually also a lot to do with the availability, accessibility to high quality greenery. Very often the areas that have low, let's say, where a lot of people with lesser income, with another educational background, those are also the locations with lesser green accessibility, lower quality of the green. And when we build new, then we can invest in new greenery. But very often those housing that we are adding are also of for high income groups. So we are actually creating the gap grows instead of that it narrows. So I think part of this study is also to sort of understand how we can combine and what kind of qualities are needed to create high, let's say, but how you can create higher quality greenery all over the city. So there are, let's say, things that even address the issues that you link to, even when we started biodiversity and greenery. It's not, as I said, it's not only to create higher biodiversity and save some species. It's actually that we know that to create or to have an impact on the health and well-being of people, a high biodiversity green area has a bigger impact than one with lower quality in terms of biodiversity. So there are a lot of studies that have been doing that. So there's a lot of reasons, I would say, to look into green areas in cities and actively make that part of the design task of urban planners and designers.
I want to add to this topic about what Franklin said about the social layer that usually is attached to this sort of approach to the city, and the way how we understand cities, and most of all, the way how we can do actually something to transform the cities in whatever direction. most of the things that it's related to this topic about the social approach and the social framework for the solutions, they are not only dependent from researchers or from the knowledge that we can bring to cities. For instance, about connectivity and accessibility and centrality, etc. I'm with my actual activity, I'm more and more a technician and a municipal planner than a researcher, period. So I'm leaving the research part. I'm trying to implement the municipality, some of the things research can give me to do as a urban planner. So in Matosinhos, we have in the master plan these areas about our urban areas available to be urbanized, that are areas that are surrounded by urban tissues, but they are voids. And those areas, they have terrains, that those terrains have they are property of someone. To intervene in those areas, we must call all the owners of the terrains and sit them in the table and say, look, we need to solve this. You cannot do it alone. We have to work together. Each one of you, because it's a perequative plan, each one of you has benefits and responsibilities towards this part of the territory. Most of the time, I would say 99% of the times, the discussion starts with what can I do in my terrain? And it's a building. And we are there to say, no, the first layer of issues that we have to address between us is what we need to connect in order for you to have a building, what you want to do there in a connected layer, a connected territory, etc. So this way of looking to the territory, this very individual way to look at the territory as the part I have of that territory and what that part can give to me, and nothing else is that important. It's something that, in this case, need to change. And the most of the conversation that we have with owners is try to shift the way they look to the territory, understanding that the territory is not the sum of parts, but it's a whole. It's more than just to adding the different parts and realize that this is a territory. So to change this mindset is something that is not that going to happen from one day to the other. And another thing is to attach this to urban policies. Urban policies is also something that engage politicians that are other part of the equation that need to be in this conversation. We have the researchers, we have the technicians, we have the owners of the plots, of the terrains, of whatever, and we have the politicians. In the end of the day, who make the decisions about the territory are the politicians, because they won the election. They are all of us mandated through our votes for the politicians to decide whatever's over the territory. So this is a track that is not only attached to one sort of stakeholder to handle all of this, but in order to involve all the stakeholders, this process that we see today, they need to take into account these different levels of conversation, of dialogue.
Yes.
And the question is, for you, we already talk about this. I'm really interested in to lower the level of the discussion, of the complexity of the dialogue that we have with these other stakeholders. If I go to an owner, to someone who has a terrain in these areas, and I talk about these things in a very complex way, they will be looking at me and they won't understand anything. And at the end of the meeting, they will go, we end the meeting as they entered the meeting with the same idea of what they want to do. So one of the topic is how to put this in available meanings for those who do not are so comfortable with all of these ways of talking about this. And the other one is the politicians. And about the politicians, there's always also another problem. It's the political cycle. And to think about the territory is not about to think about the 4 or 5 years of a political cycle or 10 years of a political cycle, for instance. You talk about a lot in this last part of your presentation, all the green issues. Green issues to be aware and to transform the territory, they will take years. So it's an option for a politician to make. Look, I'm going to do something that I won't be taking part of it as a vote. You understand? I'm going to do something that the one who's going to get the results of this, I'm not the one, because I won't be here because my political cycle is already in. So this is also a challenge. So I think we have to, and I'm talking all about this because you, in a very concrete way, you establish this straight relation between theory and practice, and the effort you are doing to connect and to bridge theory, research, and practice, and the way research and theory can actually transform the cities. Because as Franklin said yesterday, or the day before, who's actually transforming the cities are the real stakeholders, the immobiliarios. I don't know, the real estate, the real estate stakeholders. They are the one transforming the city. So to grasp this, the question is, in this process, I understand that in the initial part of the process, you develop a lot of effort to assemble this very clear track, research track. I wonder if in the last part of this, where do you think you can start to establish very clear toolkit tracks, for instance? I try to implement in the division the space matrix methodology, because we have now opportunity to think about a huge part of the territory in Matosinhos that is going to be vacant because of a refinery that is not going to be there anymore. So we try to understand the adequate density to occupy that huge part of the territory that is going to be promoted by the owner of the plot. But I wasn't able to say my team, look, this is Space Matrix. This is a book of meta. You read it, and then we
have to
talk.
read first a book like this.
And they look at the book and say, well, it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Okay, take your time.
Yeah.
A toolkit would be much easier for them to do that. So this is a challenge for you in terms of how to bridge this. This is something that I would like you to elaborate a little more, if you have that in perspective.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. It's a bit, the first question was also related to this. I think a way to, I think what very often helps when I talk to practitioners and politicians and going through the goals. So the goals that they have set, if you can link those to the spatial analysis that actually help you to inform whether you reach your goals, using as, let's say, in between KPIs or some metrics, let's say indicators, to sort of link it to those goals, could be a way, because if they often the goals they have agreed on, the aims of, let's say, that can be municipality, it can be national, it can be the global, let's say, our sustainable development goals. I mean, the whole range, let's say, and even let's say the more local stakeholders have their goals. So that could be a very fruitful way if we could link those. Then I'm very critical about having these sort of density thresholds. So if you have that, like you and Habitat did, if you have that threshold, then you're fine. We know that it's much more complex than that, so that's tricky. So I would actually go to a set of spatial analysis that can help you understand whether you reach your goals. It's a bit more complex, but I think doable. Making it also a bit, let's say you have the opportunity to make it context specific through that. So I think that's where I would go. If I would make a standard, I would not have a list of metrics and thresholds. I would actually have a list of analysis that you should do to, and how they combine related to certain goals. So I think there is and actually in our group, so we are doing, and now I showed you a lot of the, let's say, adding the green layer to our way of modeling. Another very big package is actually testing all the things that we have with practitioners and trying to get at these kind of standards, or you gave it a nicer name. Let's say this packages of can be, yeah, I think, let's say, in handbook is also not the way to go. But I don't have really the answer there. But I think I would say that key is that you actually, that spatial analysis for on the urban scale is important to be informative, but that the output of that should be directly linked to a set of goals. So that it from politician is really easy to sort of go back from, I had this goal, and then I trickle back to this analysis, which becomes a map with performances. So they can also locate, or here we are performing well, there we are not performing well. So I think that is the way to go. And that those maps or those analysis cannot be like 100. We have to sort of define, okay, what is the hierarchy? Which 3 should we start with? Should we always do? And then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. I think that's the, but this is not easy. This is very important, but it's not an easy step to take.
We have 2 more. Yes.
Super quick, it's just a follow-up. I'm just piggybacking on this conversation is sometimes, even with my students, and now it's when we have soft goals, it's very, like, for example, social sustainability. When we talk about social sustainability, when we have these types of soft goals, which are qualitative goals, it's very hard to draw criteria to say, like, am I good enough? Is this sufficient? So what is your opinion about that?
No, but I think that's such a big, broad goal. So if it's, but if we would say, we have to first define the goals more precisely. Actually, that's what very often happens when I'm out in practice. They have their list of goals. We also take them as they are. And then we have our spatial analysis, and we can somehow link them. Very often what happens is that through the spatial analysis, they are like, but our goals are so vague, because we let them also link them. They are so vague, we cannot do anything. So they start to redefine and make them more precise to be able. And then they say, some of the analysis do not link to this more precise goal, but others are. So it's also a way actually to become more precise in what are you actually aiming for. So that's very often the first iteration, that actually the goals become more precise. And then you can, for instance, like we said, if it's social sustainability, it should be, okay, let's talk about then segregation in terms of living, mixing different groups of people in the same neighborhood. That can be one of the things that we are aiming for, or it can be creating public spaces for integration. I mean, then, so if you become more precise, it's much easier to link it to interventions, etc. So I think that's the, and that it goes in both directions, because we probably also start to understand that we need to analyze maybe other things if we understand the goals, these precise goals better. But like I said, they are also informed by the types of analysis and being able to formulate the goals better.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your research and your presentation. I have a dream, which is just digital democracy. Yeah, somebody we are connecting with Franklin and David Viana. So my question is, or maybe not a question right now, but a gate to be open. Are we close to giving the people the tools and not the skills, the tools to organize by themselves the city they are using? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, oh, that's also a very interesting one. Yeah, maybe. I think, let's say, all these co-design and collaborative development of areas, I think it's very important. And I think, actually, I'm not sure if, let's say, give the tools and then let them develop them themselves, but actually I would say that these tools, and if they are, let's say, developed well and sort of concise and connected to goals, you can communicate in a much better way. You can communicate about, okay, do we agree on these goals? Maybe we don't agree, maybe we should talk about that, and then we see the implications on the map. You can have this process in a much more richer way with communities. Because now very often we use, I mean, we present and then maybe you can choose about three scenarios and you can have an opinion about it, but that's not the same thing. But I think these kind of approaches could become part of a conversation, let's say, between professionals and non-professionals. I'm not sure if we don't need professionals at all, because it's often very difficult to understand, or it's like the long term and the short term. It's the same thing with politicians. It's always hard to talk about the long term because they are short term. With a local community, it's hard to talk about the system perspective because they are interested in their local communities, of course. But you can inform them that actually making a connection over there, the bridge, which is outside of their area, can enrich their area, give them accessibility to a green area that they don't have access to now. I think you can communicate that. But and showing what, let's say, also on maps that this has an impact, and then they will maybe fight for a bridge somewhere else that is not even in their own neighborhood. I think they can actually, I mean, we all smart people, so so I think it could, but I'm not sure if it's yeah, maybe you could even just let it go all the way to the communities, but that it can become part of a conversation, a richer conversation. Yes, I agree. I think this can help. They don't have to understand all the details and even, but yes, maps help, actually, informative maps.
If we read well the Charter of Athens until the end, we'll see that in the last 3 pages, what he said is to accomplish what is till this page, there is a tool that we can offer population. It's offer the urban ground. It's clearly for the socialization of the ground. That is the tool referring to what Plaster said, that could solve the problem. Well, in the new Charter of Athens that is being made recently, the last 3 pages disappeared. So I think we have here a problem. But I don't say
Thank you, Franklin. Someone else? Well, Meta, thank you. Your presentation was really nice. The conversation was even better because we are here 40 minutes after time with lunch waiting for us. So that's a very good sign about the interest of the discussion. And this meeting is all about the interest of the discussion also, not only the presentation. So I really thank you for that and all the participants in this conversation. And now I invite you for the lunch, and we have the second presentation is you after lunch? No. Yeah, it's you after lunch, Franklin. Yes. So we have Franklin, then the other keynotes session after lunch. So enjoy lunch, and we'll be here at 2 o'clock, 2:30. What time is it in the schedule? 2 o'clock? Well, but it's not going to be possible. So 2:30. Portuguese delay. So thank you and have a nice lunch. Meta, thank you a lot.